take time to understand who you are. And I always say, like, a bad decision is better than indecision. I want to take risks. I want some stuff to fail. Throw like 5 things at the wall and 2 of them are going to stick. And, that fail fast mentality that a sports coach once who said to me, get comfortable with being uncomfortable, Dan. The most successful people I know are the biggest risk takers. Whatever it takes, no matter how young or old you are, it's the rest of your life. It's the biggest investment you've got, and that's you. And you don't get a second shot at this life. Don't wait. Embrace it. Celebrate your failures. It's the most important question in this podcast. It's the most important question in life.
Welcome to Sports and Outdoor Mentors. In this episode, I chat to Daniel Macaulay, the founder of Brandwave Marketing. We filmed this episode in a tent, so apologies for the background noise. Brandwave Marketing is a specialist marketing consultancy that handles strategy and creative for some of the leading sports and outdoor brands around the world. I chat with Daniel about life before Brandwave, about the challenges of founding and leading a business, and about a life-changing event that put everything into perspective. But before we get into the episode, I have one favor to ask. Please hit the subscribe or follow button. This helps us to continue to elevate the content and to bring you more insights from some other amazing leaders from the sports and outdoor industry. So thanks very much in advance for your support, and see you soon. Dan, what are the defining factors, the defining events of your life, if you like, that brought you to where you are today?
I would say a fairly straight trajectory, actually. I guess I was fortunate enough to really discover what my passions were and are. Super young. I've been lucky enough to be provided with many opportunities over time, and not always easy, but to sort of stay close to those passions. And I think there is a great irony that's going to give quite a few people a laugh that I'm here talking about a career with you, because I think most people would argue I've never worked a day in my life. I say that I've literally just come off the water here surfing at the wave, and we'll probably go for a run later, and that's work. And so I do consider myself and people like you who work here in the industry to be, we're the lucky ones, right?
For sure.
I grew up in Ireland on the southwest coast, which is really beautiful and a lot of opportunities for sports and outdoors. As a kid, I was a pretty mixed up kid, not particularly happy. Didn't have a particularly stable home life, and I lacked confidence and a sense of identity and just sort of the key tools to deal with a lot of different things in my life. My family moved to a little bay called Oyster Haven, and there was a amazing water sports center there called the Oyster Haven Center. It's still running, and hundreds of thousands of kids and adults have been through there, and it's really changed their lives. And I was 11. My mom had been there and done a sort of windsurfing course, and I got booked on, and I found my thing. And I remember it so clearly, and I was like, God, I love this. And for the first time in my life, I'm all right at it, I think good would be a stretch, but that was about 89, I think. And I just, from that day till this day, probably even more so, now I just wanted to be a part of that world. I was like, there's everything from mountain biking to hiking to sailing, windsurfing, and all those things. It changed me. It was a catalyst for change, an enabler. Gave me physical fitness. Later on I went to sort of compete at quite a serious level. But also, I did a lot of coaching and was coached. And so it gave me like physical fitness and health, which it still gives me. And I'm a huge believer that mental health is closely linked with your physical health. And mentally as well, mental health, now they've got a name for it, right? Blue health, green health, all these different things. But it's funny because people think like it's something new. I'm like, yeah, no shit. You think we're out here in January in the water in like 0 degrees every day just for the fun of it? Of course, I know that when times are tough in my life, that fixes me in so many different levels. I'm so lucky to have that. Societally, I see how sports and the outdoors, and I learned back then, can help others of all ages, and it can bring otherwise divided societies together. And business-wise, commercially, I see sports as a catalyst for change. And I learned back then that you can make a living out of this, as we both try to do every day. It's not easy. No one said it was easy, but it can be fun. And I wanted a job, and I remember going to Oliver Hart, who's still a friend, who was running this great water sports center, and he he was like, we can't pay you. You're 11 years old, so it's illegal. And I was like, I'll do anything. I'll clean the toilets. You don't have to pay me. I just want to be part of that. I think just energy is a really important thing. And that's probably something we'll come back to. And I think, he just probably, his own passion for it and the love of it, I think he probably saw replicated. So we had a deal where they were going to pay me in surfboards and bikes and things. And that actually went on to become a thing, which became called the panel. Where kids started getting in really young and learning the skills and getting trained to be instructors. And now thousands of kids have been through that program. And I went back to present at what became called the Spirit of Oyster Haven Trust years ago. And I saw those kids and they were like, you were the first, you just annoyed us so much that we had to let you do it. And there's a lesson from that, because that, I ended up in that situation again and again in life where I just wanted it. I just wanted it more than anybody else. There wasn't a role, and it wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the job title. It wasn't about, where the desk was. And at the time, it all seemed fairly, irrelevant. But I look back on it now and I get asked for career advice so much. If you want to be part of a thing, forget the quantitative stuff. And everyone's got overheads and everyone's got a thing, but if you're in it, you'll love it, you'll do fine, you'll rise up quick. But be in that place, and that got replicated then through different stages of my career. Probably, it'll happen again today. When I'm meeting with clients, and they're like, "Yeah, God, that guy. He's not so smart, he's not so good, but Jesus, he's pretty wildly enthusiastic about it." So that was kind of the beginning.
You spoke there about, let's say, your early days, and then obviously you went to university in Dublin, if I believe, and you did marketing degree and then business and psychology masters. But you also, I've heard, consider yourself as not being academic. I've heard you describe yourself like that. And also that you feel that having, let's say, a formal education or a degree, maybe we could specify a degree, is not necessarily important for getting in and succeeding in this industry. So can you kind of expand on that a little bit?
Some of it's not through choice, like when I was young, I wanted to fit in and I just stood out. I didn't fit in, and it made me sad. I wanted to fit in. And at some point I probably when I started getting more confidence and a sense of identity, when everyone else was playing football or whatever it was, and I was doing something different, I started realizing that that's just never going to be for me. Everyone looks left, I look right. That's just, I don't know about embracing it. I do embrace it now, but back then I started accepting it, I think would be the correct word. And I was doing a lot of windsurfing competitions. Windsurfing was like the fastest growing sport in the world back then. And I was doing pretty well in Ireland, and I thought I was good. And so I decided, like in my mid-late teens, I was going to move to Hawaii, and that set me straight pretty quickly, actually. On my plane flight out, I was actually met another kid who was 15 at the time called Robbie Swift, and he and I were in the water every day. And then I saw what a real talent looks like. And it wasn't even like who was better at certain things. It was the speed that he learned. And I realized, I'm lacking a few things here to be a professional sportsman, which is a good thing. I think it could have saved me, a long and unsuccessful career as an athlete. And I thought, right, I have to do something else. But in school, I was not academic. Really struggled to fit in to that conformity. I wasn't interested in it. And it's really interesting now, that I see different countries are moving away from this model where all kids have got to be a jack of all trades, and they're saying, you know what, let's do an aptitude test and find out what they're good at. But back then we really had to cover a lot of subjects which I wasn't, naturally right-brained. I think I literally just went surfing during some of my exams in high school. And I was lucky enough I wanted to work in the film industry, and I was lucky enough to get it in. So I took a gap year, and I worked in for the London Film Commission. I worked on an ITV kids series at like the lowest level, but I worked hard. Like I had to be on set at 4 a.m. and we're in a new place every day. And it taught me a lot about, because everyone else was kind of like first year of freshers in university, and I was, working myself to an early grave. And it taught me how hard you have to work if you want to be successful. And I don't know, somewhere along that time, I just started looking at marketing because I was really interested in psychology, really interested in business, really interested in creativity. And as soon as I started doing that, as soon as I went to college and started doing that, I was in that for the love. I wasn't in it for the getting the exam grades or getting the degree. I was in it for the love of learning, and I did do really well then. That was the first time I started, finishing first in my class, and I think a lot of people, there's a huge dropout rate because a lot of people were just like, oh, marketing, that sounds pretty fun, and then they realized they had to do some work, and every year I'd lose half of my class, but I would just read around it. I'd read the books for fun. It just ticked every box for me. I was sure is what I wanted to do. And then when it came to the end of that, I did a master's degree that was focused on motivational psychology in Dublin Business School. And again, I did a dissertation on that, and I ended up selling it to the mobile phone company that kindly let me do the research for free. Okay. And you were saying about, do people need a formal education? Do they need to study something? No. And what I learned was, yes, it was useful, but marketing moves so quickly. I always say to people like 30-40% a year, it just, channels change so quickly now. And, we're getting into the AI and the metaverse and NFTs. And, I did this over 20 years ago. So a lot of that is pretty irrelevant now. What I learned is less relevant to how I learned it. It's that, you've got to do a presentation now. This morning on the spot in front of a lot of people, that working under pressure, that having deadlines, that being accountable, those skills are good. And certainly sort of postgraduate level, there was huge amount of pressure and a lot of change, and working where I work now, it's a new company, it's a new job every day, and you either love that or hate it. I've never met anyone sort of in the middle, and thankfully I love it. It keeps it fresh, keeps it exciting, but it can also give you a nervous breakdown.
Which goes back to the need for sport and
and don't get me wrong, I've snapped into a few times.
You left university, and I don't know the time frame, but let's say your first job was marketing director for Europe for O'Neill. So a pretty
when you put it like that,
a pretty impressive step from uni straight into that role. You've touched on this a little bit already, but I understood your tactic, your approach for getting that role was somehow quite risky.
This is like my early 20s. My best friend, Patty, and my girlfriend at the time were both English, and she was doing a postgrad in ship science in Southampton. I was just finishing my postgrad, and they both convinced me to move over for the UK, and I said I'd come for a week. I packed my guitars, I packed my surfboards, and 22 years later, I'm still here. And at this point, I thought I was fairly hot shit. I was doing pretty well in university, and it's always good to get cut right back down. This is again a theme in my life. And I was applying for jobs. I was just getting nothing but rejection. And I had in the little flat we were in, the guy who lived across the road was a property developer, and his thing was you had to furnish these things with as much sort of IKEA furniture as you could physically fit in before you sold them. And you would get like 20-foot containers of flat pack. And my job was to be in there by myself. There was no heating, and I was really broken in debt. I was just doing like 12-hour days by myself, like 6 days a week, just making a lot of. You should see me make flat pack now. It's like I'm a ninja. I could do interviews, give me a lot of time for thinking, and I was applying for some pretty shitty jobs and just getting straight no's. So I was like, wow, the real world is a little tougher than I hoped. I think I listened to a talk at a graduation by Steve Jobs, and he talked about joining the dots, and when he was fired from Apple, and he went and did a calligraphy course that just seems totally irrelevant. But he wanted something to do, and then he got rehired at Apple, and all this famous campaign started, and there's famous talks. But when they came to doing the fonts on what was, I guess, the first iMac, they were like, "Are we going to use Times New Roman?" He's like, "Hell no, we're going to use, I don't know what they use, Helvetica or something." And but what he was talking is that seemingly disparate things you do in your life, and oftentimes obscure things you do in your life, do them because they, if you have the right brain, They all feed in different ways. And that was what it was for me, because I went to the London Boat Show. It's about 2002 or something like that. I printed off a load of CVs, and I'm like, this is kind of my background a bit. I mean, I don't really know that many people in the UK. Off I went to London Boat Show, and I bumped into a friend of mine from Belfast, who's still a great friend of mine, Fred Willis, who worked for one of the magazines. And he said, hey man, O'Neill, which are, huge and still are the biggest player, are hiring for a European marketing director. And I said, yeah, it sounds great, but I think I'm maybe a little junior for that. And he said, well, look, no harm. I'll come and introduce you. Another great theme, the no harm, get to know somebody. And the guy I met was Dee Caldwell, who's to this day one of the biggest sort of inspirations and influences in my life. He's ex-windsurf world champion. He was sales manager at the time. And his brother, Pete Caldwell, who's like the godfather of the sports industry, was there as well. And I saw Dee, and I said, I remember you. We did this contest during the Troubles in Northern Ireland. It was my first time up there. You came over, you were like the VIP, you had to present the prizes, and you didn't have any kit. And I was riding the same brands as you, and I lent you my kit. And I said, well, you owe me, you got to give him this job, don't you? And he was like, oh, cheeky little fucker. But, it was something interesting. It was, it was trying to pick out a bit. That only got me past the first interview, right? It was a connection. And then I heard some of the level of some of the other people who were going for it. I think the marketing director of Oakley in South Africa and a few other people. And no matter how much I tried to sort of fluff it up with CV, it was what it was. Anyone could see straight through it. But what I did have was that love. Arguably I've been training for that job my whole life. I'm not talking about with degrees, like just with water sports and knowing the ocean. And I felt confident in that I knew the market because I was the market, And at that point, I've been lucky to travel a lot as well and see it more sort of internationally. But, I was like, Dan, you're going to have to pull something out here to do it. So what I did was, instead of, going saying, you guys are great, this is perfect, this is my dream job, etc., I was like, I need to go out and do a sort of SWOT analysis in this company. So I went around and I interviewed some of the key retailers and asked them about, all the things about like the pricing structures, about the delivery times, the rest of it. I spoke to some of the athletes. I spoke to some of the guys in the magazines. I mean, this was almost pre-website, definitely pre-social media. And I talked about, the different sort of joint promotions, the opportunities and the reviews. And I spoke to some of my friends who worked in the industry about the manufacturing process and all the rest of it. And I put together a pretty scathing analysis of where it was. And then I put together my, if you hire me, this is how I would fix it. And then I went out and I bought a t-shirt with a big O'Neill logo on the center. Man, talk about fake it till you make it. And I remember going for the interview. God, I'm so embarrassed saying this. And I was in the car and that Eminem song was on, I think, don't make me sing on a podcast. But it was all about being in the moment, and you got to make it, and this is now's your time to shine. And I was all G'd up in the car, and I was like, this is it, Dan. My other job, I got to get this in, right? I was on the second interview for a dental insurance company, and you've seen my teeth. I'm never going to get that job, right? So life could have been so different. I don't want to work in dental insurance. But I needed a job at this point. And I went in and I presented. I was like, and I guess everyone else had taken, I said everyone looks left and I look right, had taken one approach. And I said, there's a challenge and an opportunity here, because you want to grow the business and we need to identify where those opportunities are. And this is where I think they are. And I'm not sure, but I think if we tried some of these things, we need to take a few risks and be willing to fail a little bit as well. I think I can move it forward. And between the shared passion for sports, which was obvious, between the fact that I'd done something different and actually maybe, got their attention, those guys were both, they were used to faking it till they make it. And not for a second do they not see right through it. But I thought, the older I get, the more I concentrate on, I think about energy, and it just really supersedes anything, what's on paper and skills and all those things. And I was gonna learn it, and they said, okay, well, we'll give you this, but you're on trial for double the amount of time that anyone else would be. But I was like, yeah, I got you now, right? Once I was in there, and that's how I got the O'Neill job so young. And then, pretty quickly, I was driving like this banger car, and they gave me a brand new Mercedes van, and I was flying out to, Hawaii for my sales meetings on the North Shore, and I was like, wow, sometimes life is not all about getting what you want; it's about keeping what you got. And I was like, this is cool. I can do this for a while. And the friends I made there at work, that was 21 years ago. I've just come off the water. I've just been surfing with those guys, people like Joe Turnbull. They are still great friends, and we still find ways to cross paths, and we hang out. We did a big endurance challenge together. And that comes down to, work colleagues, really, really second to, we're just a bunch of people with aligned values and passions. And that was that.
Great story and an amazing opportunity. And you were there for, I think, pretty much 4 years. But when you, looking back at those 4 years, I'm sure going into that role, you had this vision that it was probably at the time, or not probably, I'm sure your dream job, and like, it's almost not going to get any better than this somehow. But was there anything that surprised you and disappointed you somehow?
I don't think there was anything that disappointed me as such. And for sure, for the first couple of years, it was my dream job. Now, I know a few people who've had that since, and some didn't like it as much as others. Again, I'm great friends with Dan Macaulays, who's got that role currently, and he lives it. He's flying all around the world. He's surfing every day and just doing some of the most exciting stuff. I think like any other role, it's so easy to blame the company, to blame the job, but it is what you make it, right? My approach to it at the time was to be useful. Be useful. And it was, on the outside, it was a huge company, but O'Neill was a wetsuit company. And it licensed the O'Neill name out at the time to lots of different companies all around the world. And so we worked directly for Jack O'Neill, and I was lucky enough to meet him when he was alive and go to his house and go surfing. And that was really cool. But at the time, it was a very, very complicated company. So on the outside, you've got this chilled North Californian surf brand. But on the inside, you've got like $1 billion business with, agencies, licensees, franchisees, fast growth, crack, tensions. So there was a lot to learn about the politics of that. And, a lot of those companies, action sport companies, the Billabong, the Quicksilvers, the Rip Curls, they all went through that rapid growth, but then also went through a rapid decline. So I was there for the rapid growth period. So it's really exciting to work on a job where you got bigger opportunities. I got to run like a WSL surf event in Scotland, etc. There were a lot of people doing a lot of things that they didn't necessarily want to do, that this was outside their remit. And I just went and mopped those up. They did say like, who wants to handle this? And no one would put their hand up. And I put my hand up and do it. And I just inherited all these things that were a mess, but also I became indispensable very quickly. Because all those really messy things, I was the only person who sort of knew what was going on. And that far exceeded marketing. By the end of my 4-year term there, technically I was the marketing manager, but I also wrote the 3-year business plan for the whole business, by which time I was about 26, 27. So, obviously I had to work with all the different departments, but I was able to pull it together. And that was my sort of business background and training. And so many people I see work in companies, they understand their job, but they really don't understand the business model. And, I think anyone like yourself will know when someone says this or that, and you're like, a classic one is, you'll hear people talk about sales and turnover, particularly salesmen, right? And you say, what's the profit of the company? No idea. And they work there 20 years. So I learned a couple of really important lessons about that, about business in general, that marketing managers wouldn't necessarily know, like being liquid. That thing they say that like turnover is vanity, profit sanity, cash flow is reality. And particularly in the current times, where it's tough for everyone, right? We're just talking about this pre-podcast. It's tough times, and the temptation to take work here and there because, in theory, there's a big turnover from that, but actually it's not profitable. Or even worse, you're not going to get paid. So I get nastier as I get older, and I was a real people pleaser when I was younger, but now I realize in business you got to be pretty tight on these things if you want to stay in business. And I was lucky enough towards the end of my term. It was an education, and people took a risk on me. People put their name behind me, and people mentored me a lot. And I've just been doing the Brandwave Brand Labs, where the last 3 days we've probably had 100 founders through with our VIP guest mentors. And I try to give that back now a little bit in terms of that early mentoring, and because I was lucky enough to have people, and people still continue to do that for me a lot now. So that's a big theme for me.
You said there that people were taking a risk on you somehow, but then you took arguably even a bigger risk in the next step. You gave up your nice monthly salary, which I'm sure at whatever it was, 26, 28 by the time you left, I think, something like that. You were probably thinking, okay, well, this is nice.
I had friends who got really upset with me.
Yeah.
Really upset. How could you do this? Look at my job. Look at your job. Are you insane? And the misconception at the time was that I had some big thing lined up. Which I didn't necessarily want to run out and say I don't. But I'll tell you now, I didn't. Maybe I thought I had a few little things, but they fizzled out pretty quickly. And to give that some context, why I did it, I'd added my value, and it's not about money. It's not about job titles. For me, it's about evolving, always evolving, always learning, always feeling a little bit out of my depth. And I work in brand side, as you know, can feel a little bit like Groundhog Day. I'm doing the same thing. I'm not feeling scared. And this is a theme for me, is I've always got to feel a little bit scared, and a little bit, my feet can't touch the bottom properly. And there was people above me who I felt had taught me what it was that they had to learn. And again, not just the surf industry or the action sports industry, but the sports industry can be incredibly insular. A lot of people grow up in it. Marketing, the level of marketing in the sports industry is really low compared to other industries. My frustration was internally, I thought I can cruise 20 years in this, but how much am I really going to be challenged? The other part was I had this kind of itch that I had to scratch, because there was something that I wanted that I couldn't find. And I'm like, well, if I can't find this, maybe I can go create it myself. And that was a bit of a leap. And what that came from was I was working with marketing agencies, all different kinds in different countries. And some I'd inherited with the role, and some I was dealing with. And they were what I would now refer to as generalist agencies. So they were good agencies, good strategy, good creative, but they'd done dog food, they'd done Disney, Nissan, and they were showing me this, and I was like, well, that's great, but how much do you know about my industry? Have you ever been to ISPO? And then have you heard of Corey Lopez or whoever the athletes I worked with at the time? And they had this glazed look, and it wasn't even like the tactical stuff. It was more understanding the mindset. And anything I got through was just so wrong. And I thought, God, man, I'm going to have to teach you guys this, and I don't want to. I want you to come in here preloaded. So my idea, having never worked in an agency in my life, and really not knowing the process, which was a painful learning curve. And my concept for Brandwave was, we understand your target market because we are your target market. And whatever else about the services that we're going to offer you guys, which were better or worse at the time, and frankly, there was quite a bit of learning on some of those, especially in around, when social media came in, etc. But I was like, we get it first. And I was kind of counting on what had got me into that job and previous jobs was gonna get me past. But I had nothing lined up. And Pete Caldwell, who was my boss, became a great friend. And I sat down at lunch a year before I left and said, I'm going to move on. And he fully embraced me. He was like my business dad. And, I made sure that my assistant at the time, he stepped up into my role. But I worked for a year. Every lunchtime I'd sit with my notepad and just sketch out, what's the service, what's the point of difference, what's the process, etc. So by the time I started, day one of Brandwave, someone sit down and talk about the business, I felt like I'd already been doing it for years. And I think, again, that's the learning, that's the advice I would give to people. A lot of people start the company and they start thinking about the nitty gritty, when they've left the job. But actually having a job, that's a safety net, that provides you a secure framework. Because it's really hard to think when you're under massive pressure. So I had that time, and actually, we didn't go too far from that. when we started. But I remember the night before I was due to start Brandwave, I think it was like January 1st or whatever, I snore really badly, and I was kicked out of bed, and I went downstairs, slept on the couch. It was really uncomfortable. My neck was hurting and hadn't slept much. I woke up and I was like, fuck, this is it, man. I was like, what have I done? And that was the beginning of Brandwave 17 years ago.
Amazing. So when you look back, so let's say 16 years ago to that first 12 months, what was the best and the worst times of that first 12 months?
The worst was the isolation, because I've been used to working as a team. You don't want clones of yourself in a team. You look at like the A-Team, from the series from the 80s, they're all really different, right? They're built different, they look different, all got different personalities, and they've got different skill sets. And suddenly it's just me and the cat. And I'm the accounts department, customer service department, product, et cetera, and I'm covering different things that I'm not naturally good at, but also just the loneliness, and I see that now, and it is lonely. No matter how many people you have work for you, it's lonely at the top. And I didn't have that team, and even when I have had that team, it's still ultimately me at the top making the decision. So that was a transition, and it was hard. And I was really lucky. I had a former supplier, a guy called Duncan Hotston, who had become a friend. He had worked over a print company that had a family, it was a family-owned business, and had a bit of a design element to it as well. And he sort of stepped in as my informal business partner for the first few years, and was able to handle more of the production side of things. And I was able to handle the bits I'm good at. So that, within a few months, I found a bit of a solution to that. That was the challenge. The good stuff was the work came quick. I think one of the guys in the marketing department who'd taken over got really stressed, punched the computer screen and got electrocuted, I think. I had to take a little bit of time off work.
Wow.
And I got a call saying, we need some help with a few things. And I said, well, my prices have gone up now, from nothing to a little bit more, because I'm so busy, right?
Of course.
I went to the boat show again in London, and I thought, God, here I am again. What have I done? I bumped into my friend, Fred Willis, and he said, the guys from Henry Lloyd are here. And I said, well, Henry Lloyd are way too big for me. And he said, well, you should just go have a chat. And pretty much the same story all over again, got on really well with a guy called Dave Ellis, who was the marketing director, became a good friend afterwards. Just that, we didn't talk about work. We just sat down and talked about the kit we're using, da-da-da-da-da-da. And it was like, of course we're going to work together. So we can just go sailing and fly around the world and do photo shoots and have a great time. And we were able with that client, again, the sailing industry, that the marketing is not sophisticated. And I was looking at much bigger things at the time, and I had a lot of ideas. That was a time when everyone on the high street was wearing a sort of a Douglas Gill or a Helly Hansen or a Henry Lloyd or a Musto, and they were one of our first clients. And then a few months later, Adidas and Neil Pride Group. And so really within a few months, we had a pretty great portfolio. And then we have those kind of clients, the smaller brands and the startup brands. It's like a badge of honor. No matter how good you are, you need that sort of third-party accreditation, which we got quick. And then I started making mistakes on every level, and arguably, still do. But that part, getting the business in and getting growth and getting visibility, it happened pretty quick. And I was way out of my depth, but I love it. And I was like, I just knew I was going to figure it out because I just wanted it so badly.
You also, over the years, you've supported other business, sometimes as non-exec director. You support a lot of trade shows, a lot of events, as you have been here the last couple of days, a lot of associations. How do you find the time to do that, or to do those two? And I wish I could say it was two things, but knowing you, it's not two things.
So I guess it goes back to what I said about the start, the perception or the misperception that I've never worked a day in my life. It's probably closer to the truth that I've never worked a day in my life. Someone says to me, you need to go to planet Earth, Dan. And I say, well, I went there once, I didn't like it. And you say, work, how do I find the time to do those things? But most of these things are things that I would do anyway. So for example, we're here at the Wave at Bristol, which is human-made wave pools in the world. They're a client. We did their strategy recently. Nick, the founder's become a good friend. I'm going to come here anyway, man. The fact I get to work on it, that's probably why they had me. I'd already done my staff do down here. I was already loitering We just hadn't met. That's work, and I'm just in using the product. We understand your target market because we are. I'm here as an ambassador of the Blue Earth Summit, which is something I feel really passionate about. And so for people who aren't aware, the Blue Earth Summit is, I think, the world's probably largest and most important conference on sustainability and purpose-driven business, ethical business practice. I would be going to that anyway, even if I didn't work in the industry. That just ticks every box for me. So the fact that I'm here and speaking and I'm hosting panels, we're doing Brand Lab, that's a bonus. I'm also an ambassador of the Youth Adventure Trust. For the best part of a decade now, we've been doing a lot of pro bono work for that charity, and we help conceptualize the Hike, Bike, Paddle Endurance Contest, which is a sports industry event, or as we refer to it, the sports industry event. We actually did that last week. So you're saying I have to go outside and just go ride bikes all day and go running and go paddleboarding, and we've managed to raise, I think just with that initiative, like £130,000 to help vulnerable young kids. Kids did not get the opportunities that you and I got growing up, to get in sports. Kids who start displaying behavioral problems because of challenges they've generally got at home. And it's not just like a one-time intervention. Hey, have a nice day. Let's go to Disneyland. This is a 3-year program. They have to be recommended by the school and they get a mentor. And I remember at the time, it was Andrew Denton who introduced them to us. We were doing a lot of charities at the time, paid. That was how I paid the mortgage. We were doing the RNLI, Children's Hospice Southwest, Target Ovarian Cancer, loads of things. But I saw this one. This one was about sports and the outdoors and how it changed kids' life. And I'll be honest, I just burst into tears watching it. And I was like, we have to be a part of that. So now Ollie, my managing director, and one of my best mates, he's on the board. And we're all in that. We put in so much extra time. It's for the love of it. Arguably, we'd be doing it anyway, If Brandwave didn't exist, these are all things I'm really into. So when you say, how do I find the time? It doesn't feel like I'm spending a lot of time, and a lot of the things that companies I've invested in or been a non-exec director of stuff, it's generally stuff that I really strongly believe in. And I think that kind of comes from, I'm lucky that I really discovered my purpose, my sense of identity, my belief system very, very young. I've always believed in that. And that's been the acid test of what I'll get involved in. So, sport as a catalyst for positive change, anyone can say that, right? But for me, at the hardest times in my life, that's what I come back to. That's like my true north. And when it comes to a decision-making process of things that I want to be involved in outside of Brandwave, that's sort of my framework for making decisions. The biggest mistakes that I have made when people that you want to make a quick buck on something, or do a business, quickly to this, that, and the other, and it's about the money or it's about the fame or something else. That's generally where I kind of regretted those decisions. But the ones like I've just mentioned, they're not easy, but I love it.
I fully understand your answer, and I think you're very humble in your answer. But you're still making a choice to, let's say, do that, whatever the time is. And yes, I get it. It's a passion and you love doing it, but it's still a choice to do that rather than maybe spend more time growing Brandwave or spend time with your children. Or it's obviously a very conscious choice and a conscious decision.
You mentioned children. And as you know, I lost my youngest daughter through a simple throat infection 15 months ago. That's the hardest thing I've ever had to deal with. I have two other children. Going back and doing sports, I knew what I had to do, in order to survive that. And still every day, there are things that I do from meditation to ocean swimming. And generally when I'm at my best is when I'm outdoors and I feel most connected to her. So personally, this isn't something that I just talk about. This is my way of living my life. With my two other children, I want to be an inspiration to them. I came here with my friend Tamara, who's the founder of Sweaty Betty. She was one of my guest mentors yesterday, and I was just out surfing with her two girls this morning, and they watched her up on stage, and she's doing amazing things with the Sweaty Betty Foundation, helping girls through sport, and I'm slowly starting to get my kids involved in the sports. I'm not pushing it. Rather than telling them about values, I want them to live it and I want them to feel it. So when we do beach cleans and all these things, related to like the Blue Earth Summit and sustainability. Plus, I live by the beach. The water's full of shit. And, the last summer, I was on 8 weeks, I was on antibiotics, 2 courses of antibiotics, just from the water being over 10 times over the legal limit, because Southern Water, would just rather pay the fines, and they're pumping it out, and we're all getting ill through this thing we love. And this is my personal playground. This is where I go to fix myself, and I'm starting to fear when I go in the water, I'm going to become seriously ill. So I have a personal investment. It's not just business. Should I spend more time on Brandwave? Maybe, but I have a great managing director, Ollie Robinson, who's still here, and he has a lot of the hard and soft skills that I don't. Would quite correctly argue that he's my boss, as is probably everyone else who works there. It's connecting the dots. When we go to this mentoring thing at, say, a brand lab, there's hundreds now gone through that. Have we had any work out of any of those guys? No, most of them are still small, but I just believe in this sort of almost scientific karma way. If you're out there, you're doing, things that you believe in with the Youth Adventure Trust, with the Blue Earth Summit, with other businesses. You mentioned the Great Sussex Way. That's something I'm passionate about. The average agency, I read a report by the Design Business Association last 3 years in the UK, and just coming up to 17. So sometimes when I think I'm doing everything wrong, I think, well, I'm still in the game, so I must be doing something right. And I also said earlier that it's not about getting what you want, it's about keeping what you got. But within that, I said I made so many mistakes, and I have, but I'm so much closer to my values now in terms of the people who work for me and aligned values. I've got the best team I've ever had. Maybe not the most talented at web design or some specific thing, but overall, in terms of the love it, in terms of the passion, they could all get paid more elsewhere. They get headhunted, they could get a fancier office. It's purpose driven, and we're doing, a lot of things to change the world through sports, things like the Daily Mile, Go Run for Fun, Rebels Crew, Stone Crew, lots of initiatives, Get Outside through Ordnance Survey, all these campaigns that we've done, manifest our own values. And I believe that the other things I'm involved in, it's almost like an ecosystem. But I've closed the door recently on quite a few things where they just run their course. I feel that I've added my value, and next year, I think maybe 12, 18 months time, I see things will, it's always cyclical. This economy, it'll start to pick up again. And my eyes are very, very firmly focused on the future now. And I've got a few ideas that I'm going to be working on next year.
Touching on a little bit of a comment you said earlier on about at a younger age, you were a people pleaser. I would imagine one of the difficult things for you or one of the most important things is knowing when to say no and what not to do.
Like, I've learned that the hard way. You talk about the biggest mistakes that I've made on many levels in my life. It is that I'm the opposite to a control freak. Like, it's that analogy about someone, you give someone a fish, you feed them for a day, give them a rod, you feed them for life. On every level, from kids to employees, to partners, to business partners, I am all about transparency, about demystifying what I do. It's not that hard. And about, empowerment, and people just turn off their brain, when they're told what to do. So within Brandwave and other companies that I've started, people will say, first, if you could ask Dan, the first thing he's going to say is, what do you think you should do? A lot of people have come to me over the years, and I think I've had maybe close to 100 now full-time employees at Brandwave, and God knows how many sort of contractors and freelancers. They say, oh, previously I wasn't recognized enough for, my intelligence or my drive, and I wanted something where I can really run it. And I was like, well, careful what you wish for, because if you come here, you're going to get it. Day one, it's sink or swim. Again, I've never seen a gray area on this. Some people rise to it, and I was like, you hire who you want, you do it, but it's yours. That works for me. And I think oftentimes with people in life, their greatest strengths is their greatest weakness. The times it works against me is when people see me as an opportunity, I think. Because I'm lucky enough to be at a position where I can invest in companies. And, when I talk about invest, cash is the cheapest kind of investment, right? More expensive ones is resources and energy and commitment, as well as cash. And sometimes I get blinded by the stoke. I'm just so on board for something, and the red flags are there, everyone else can see them. And it's not that I don't see them. I'm just going to put so much positive energy into this that I'm just going to crush it. It's just, sometimes that crushes me, and it has done on a few occasions, which is why mental health, particularly amongst men, is another thing for me, particularly amongst founders of companies, and in my experience, the people who are more driven that they are suffer the most from mental health. And it's not from external factors of family or business or their boss shouting at them. It's actually from not living up to their own standards. And that's happened to me a few times. And in all instances where I've been blinded by the stoke and, probably gone on things or let things go on for longer than they should have, because I don't particularly like confrontation. I've learned, I think it was Oscar Wilde who said, experience is the word we give to our mistakes. And I'm very experienced. I've made a lot of mistakes. I'm lucky that, as a grey hair consultant now, that's a thing that I'm able to give the benefit of having done so many things and been part of so many companies, across all things, from product to service, environmental stuff, tech stuff. The benefit of that is one, it's made me a better person. I'm more empathetic and I feel a lot more people's energy and I listen a lot to what they say. And two, it makes me a better consultant as well. So that would be the positive from all those times that I probably should have said no.
So what would you consider to be your most important task as a business leader?
People, whether it's an employee, whether it's a client, whether it's a business partner, making good decisions around people. I'll give you an example for Brandwave. Years ago, my wife was heavily pregnant with twins. She was working in the company, heading up some big clients. She was very uncomfortable and pregnant, and we really needed to replace her. I was under some pressure. Recruitment was quite hard, which is why you need a good recruitment consultant, if you know any. And my team had interviewed a lot of candidates, and we got down to one, and they said, really, this person's got all the skills, lovely person, got all the experience. All you need to do is go into that interview. I was like, this is just a formality. I'm going to go in. And always my first question is not about any of those things. It's about sports. This person had come from a professional sports background, and I said, tell me about sports. What are you into? And they said, well, I used to do a lot of sports, but these days, life's taken over. I'm not that into it. Interview over. You're not getting the job. That's a values thing, because what I have learned, and I have made those mistakes in the past, is that's what's going to get someone to the job. That's going to make them move country, take a, maybe a less salary they would in a bank where they've already been offered a job. The ability to, our offices on the beach, we go surfing or running or something every day. The ability to work on things you love, that's going to keep you there. But it's also, you're going to be really good at your job and you're going to inspire others and that energy. My job is to get those people and retain them. And I'd say the same comes from selecting the businesses that I want to be involved in. If someone comes to me and says, I'm doing this, the project is to work for it, 3 years, exit, and, make exit amount of money. And that's the, no matter how attractive that is, it's just a different energy to the one that I'm working with. And I play more of the, what Simon Sinek would call the infinite game. It's not about getting to the top of the mountain. It's about enjoying the view on the way up. Yeah. And I've got some life in me left on that.
Good to hear.
Just about. If I don't fall off the fucking mountain.
Yeah. There's always that risk.
Yeah.
There's always that risk. How would you describe yourself as a leader? I mean, what type of leader are you?
High energy. I think, as I've been through quite a lot over the last few years. And, one of the net effects of that is I just have less energy. I used to be like one of those nuclear submarines that never needs to go to port. I just didn't need to sleep. I just had high energy for everything all the time. And people used to think it was fake. They're like, this guy can't really be that into it and that passion. But no, man, I have nothing to prove to anybody. It's real, and I'm doing it for the love. And I'm still high energy. I just don't have as much of it. And I need to be more selective about who, when, and where I expend that energy. So that's kind of the change that happened. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It comes down to saying no, which is something I do a lot more of. But it actually means that I need to, be more selective about what I work on. And as a result, I'm really happy at the moment. In terms of what I do as a leader and as a consultant, I simplify things. I think, my sister said years ago, she said, some people down are onions. They just got layers and layers. You said, you're a potato. She's
Wow.
like, yeah. I think she meant it, however she meant it, I took it as a compliment, because she said, and we're still so close, me and my sister. And she always says, you're not evolved a day since you were 10 years old. If you knew you then, you know you now. And you know what you get. So for me, it's simplicity. And actually, in business and in marketing, people love to overcomplicate things, and that's the problem. So you take marketing resources, time, money, people, for an example. Classically, what people do is, you got a can of soda, and they pour it into a Le Creuset dish, like a baking dish, and it's super wide because everyone's telling you need to be across social media, you need to be across influencers, you need to be across this, and no matter how big you are, it's relative. I work some companies got like $1 billion marketing budget, and they say we don't have enough resources. It's relative, but what you do is you have breadth, but you have no depth. You have no real resonance in any of those things. And it really happens when things get too democratized in marketing, and you get all other people shouting about what you should and shouldn't be doing. And confidence. A lot of people just want to be seen to doing everything everyone wants. I'm perfectly happy with being hated, and I'm used to people disagreeing with me. People disagree with me all day long. It's almost my job to disagree with. But what you should do is you should take those resources. You need to map the landscape, look at what everyone else is doing, and just say, fuck that. I cannot win with a quarter of the budget against, this. And you pour it into like a Pilsner glass or a test tube and do less more. You get real penetration. And brands that go really, really quick are super focused in business and in marketing about what they're going to do and what they're not going to do. So, coming back to your question about the value I add as a leader, or what is my style, it's simple. There's a lot of things going on, and it's just stripping all that stuff away and trying to do less more and do it really, really well. So I'm generally, I don't second guess myself much. And I always say like a bad decision is better than indecision. So being quite decisive and then being a force for driving it forward and completing it.
What is like an energy sapper for you? What is something where you're like, okay, I know that I need to avoid this type of person or this type of situation because it just takes my energy?
It's the most important question in this podcast. It's the most important question in life. Bad energy is toxic. Bad energy will destroy everything in your business. It will destroy everything in your life. And the inverse is true. I think about good energy. You can get through pretty much anything. I think if your energy is right and the people you surround yourself with have the right kind of energy. And for me, it's not a metric anymore. It's the metric. It's the only metric. And it's hilarious to hear myself saying this, hippie Dan, because really I divide my life into, there's pre the death of my daughter Ruby, and there's post, and it's really Dan 2.0. And I do have a very different outlook. And I think people see me on the outside. I'm still going surfing. I still sound the same. I still look the same. But it's almost like a lot of the software, the operating system internally has changed. And one of the big ones that come out of it is this question of energy. And I think not only do people have an energy, but energy can change. People can have a bad energy and it becomes a good energy, and vice versa. So just because, you decided to so align yourself with somebody, and that could be nothing to do with you. That could be stuff, things that they have going on in their life, and that goes bad. It's be able to be aware of it and confident enough, not to make it like a big thing, but just to be like, I need out of this, get away, because it's going to damage you on all kinds of levels. There's drains and there's batteries or whatever it is. I'm so lucky to be friends with some of my heroes, like people like Tom Kay. Everyone gets this, right? You don't have to meet this guy for 2 seconds. People like Francisco Goya. People had posters of on my wall when I was a kid, who I'd now consider very, very, very close friends. And speaking selfishly, what do I get from those relationships? It's not, it's not quantitative things. It's qualitative things. It's the energy. That's the biggest value of it all. And these guys have all been through the fucking mill on everything. If someone's listening to this podcast thinking they're going to find like a quick fix to, an easy life and an easy career, Elon Musk said something on the lines of like being an entrepreneur is like eating broken glass and looking into the black abyss of death. And I think he's underselling it. It's even harder than that, and it gets, and with scale, those problems, you get even bigger. But what you do is you get better at it. The people I really look up to, they knew this, whether they talk about it in terms of energy or just the way that they behave, they just emit it and people are drawn to it. And the world has a way of working through things, because it just reaches critical mass, but also they're self-aware enough that they're selective about who they're letting in. And if there's a bad energy, being it with your team or whatever, it's going to be, they're pretty quick to act on it. I heard an interview a couple of years ago with a new agency, and the CEO was there, and he said, we're so successful, we've never lost a single employee, we've never lost a single client. And I just burst out laughing. I was like, man, I almost wanted to grab him and and have a fatherly chat, because that's the worst fucking metric, right? Like, there is a natural attrition of team. There's always going to be a churn, and you need to do that. Natural churn of product, natural churn of clients. And if you take that personally, it will destroy you, because things aren't just going to be, aligned forever. And I think the sooner you realize that, then the quicker you can start acting upon it and being more selective about the energy. And that works on every level for me, like including clients. Like, people think that clients select agencies, but agencies select clients as much, if not more so. And you want to do that based on that sort of energy and that values level.
Maybe connected to that, I wanted to touch on, I think for you and for Brandwave, authenticity is super important. Have you been in a situation where you've had to take a difficult decision around a client or a strategic decision from a business development point of view that you felt, okay, if it just doesn't feel right, like it doesn't feel authentic for us as a business, so either we're not going to do it or we're going to do it in a different way?
Yeah, I have. I think we went through periods of very fast growth at Brandwave, where we were opening offices in other countries, overheads doubling quickly, team doubling, and they call it growing pains. They call it growing pains because it is painful. Because all those things, you had a pretty tight handle on your operations. The ethos was in the company, etc. You grow quickly, and the wheels can come off. And you can also take the eyes, your eyes off the kind of clients that you're taking on as well, which is our fault, and I'll own that. When I was younger, I'd meet potential clients, and they go, oh, Dan, you don't want to work with us, you're a nightmare. And that's that blinded by the stoke. They fucking told me. They warned me up front. They're eating, in court with half a dozen agencies, they're churning through agencies, and I'm sitting there up to my neck in shit a few months later, and I'm like, whose fault is this really? It's my fault. And I think that sort of comes from that, I talked about making decisions under pressure, where, my overheads are, just the fixed cost of staff is getting into millions, and I need to take these really, really big contracts. Oftentimes that can be with a sports brand or something on the periphery of sports, but the people don't come from it, and I've got no interest in it whatsoever. Then I don't have that alignment. We work with Shimano, for example. Ollie and my team, when they go to Shimano, the first 2 days, they just start biking with those guys. I've got half a dozen clients that come to my office. I'm saying, which day of the week are you going to come? They want to know which day the swell is best. So we can go surfing together, and we're going to try the products, and we're going to talk about it, and they're going to see, can I get them a wetsuit, and vice versa. That bond, it's not got a dollar value on it, but when the project hits problems, which they inevitably do, their stock hasn't arrived in time, the budget isn't what it was, etc. That's what's going to see you through. Plus, I want to take risks. I'm not at the stage in my life where I just want to do safe campaigns where everyone's like, oh, it seems to be fine. Nah, indifferent. I want some stuff to fail, because if you're at the cutting edge of marketing, you've got to be prepared to throw like 5 things at the wall, and 2 of them are going to stick. And, that fail fast mentality, that, if you, I had a sports coach once who said to me, get comfortable with being uncomfortable, Dan. So back to your question about where that's gone wrong. I think the people, it's been great when it's, when things are going well. when it's a transactional relationship, it's a lot less partnership. It's more client supplier. We're here, you're here. But as soon as there's a problem, which there always is, then you don't have that fallback of those aligned values. So I come back to the original point of purpose-driven values, energy. That's a great decision-making framework. And for those, people listening who are thinking about their next job, maybe they've made those mistakes already. Maybe they're just chasing the highest dollar or the best job title, etc. 9 times out of 10, that's going to land you in a really unhappy place. It's about being introspective and knowing who you are, what you want, what your values as a system are, being able to define, be able to articulate and project that, and then hopefully go to someone like yourself who can put them next to or introduce them to an organization who has that same belief system. The rest of the interview is it's going to be far more about alignment.
So if you knew you weren't going to fail, you wouldn't fail, is there anything that you would do differently now in what you do professionally?
It comes down to your relationship with risk. The most successful people I know are the biggest risk takers, and they've got a different view on risk. You can take a lot of risk early in your career and then they get comfortable and stop taking it. And it makes me think of, some of the big wave surfers I know. To an outsider, they'd say, you're crazy. But they're not crazy. They do a lot of training. They do a lot of evaluation. It's a calculated risk. If I could do anything, I would take more risks. I would embrace failure. It failed, and I'm so proud of that, because that shows that I'm pushing it. The best surfers, you watch them out there, they are falling every 2 seconds, because they're pushing the boundaries. And the guy who comes in and goes, I haven't fallen all day. I haven't got my hair wet. That doesn't impress me at all. So when I meet marketing managers or business leaders who say, I've never lost a client, I've never lost stuff, that doesn't impress me. I want to hear your horror stories. I want to hear about your sleepless nights, and turning that round to the future. When I'm feeling a little bit nervous about things, when I'm getting a bit of a twitch, where I go, whoa, fuck this, this could go wrong. That's when I know I'm pushing things to the next level. Yeah. I've been in those kind of businesses where that's sort of, what if we make a mistake? What if people think we're doing the wrong thing? Those kind of insecurities. And what you end up with is just indifference. You just end up doing what everyone else has done. I had a client who said to me once, if your campaign doesn't shock or offend me, then you're not doing a job. And I actually am a big fan of Steve Bartlett and the Diary of a CEO, and I'm just reading his book that came out a few weeks ago, and he said the enemy is obscurity, the enemy is indifference. And I talked about that Economist article, but also I read a Forbes article that became quite famous, and it said the average North American consumer receives between 7,000 and 10,000 marketing messages a day. And, you just look at how many messages we received yesterday, in terms of where we are. So how are you going to get cut through? It's certainly not by doing what everyone else does. And he said he would rather that 80% of people hated what you do vocally. You look at like the successful brands like Tesla, etc. You got, people posting videos of cars, batteries bursting on fire, and yet they're very quickly the most valuable car company out there. He said, I prefer 80% of people actively didn't like my brand and 20% were passionate about it and could align themselves with it, because at least those 20% will fucking buy. Because the alternative is 100% of people are just like, that's safe, that's okay, that's what I expected from a brand in that sector. Take more risks.
So this could be the most difficult question of the podcast for you.
No pressure.
What's your favourite piece of sports or outdoor gear? Because I'm guessing you've got a lot. So,
there's an irony to this in that, by virtue of what I do, I get given a lot of kit, right? But I hate it. I'm like a minimalist. Like,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Everyone says to me, Dan, you must have so many bikes. You must have so many surfboards. You must have so many this. I can't sleep at night, so I got too many. So, and I travel a lot. So I want like equipment that's really versatile. And the more choice I have, everyone knows somebody, at that competition who's going back and changing their kit every 2 minutes. And I'm like, there's a lot to be said for getting to know the equipment you have. My favorite piece of sports equipment. Can I tell you my favorite guitar?
If you want.
I've got a Gibson Les Paul Standard, a vintage one, and that's the same as what Slash played.
Okay, cool.
And that was a gift on our 10th anniversary from...
The double...
No, not the double one,
okay.
The single, in sunburst color. And funnily enough, I don't play that guitar much, but we were talking about materialistic stuff. If the house was burning, after the kids, I think that's going to be something that comes out. That was a gift from my ex and my team at Brandwave on our 10-year anniversary. That's something I felt I never deserved. I always wanted it, and it took someone else to get it for me. And I would say at the moment, I was in Hawaii a few weeks ago. There's a brand called Quattro, which the top guys in the world is a custom board manufacturer, shaped by the greatest manufacturer of all time, Keith DeBull, and owned by himself and my really good friends, Lalo and Francisco Goya. But there's a waiting list, it's like the Stradivarius of boards. Yeah, last time I was out there, like we're gonna make you a board, and I got to work a little bit with Brazinho, the world champion, and one of my other friends, Adam Lewis, who's become one of their shapers. And yes, it's about the board, but it's also about the process, right? It's not about the end of the cake. And I got to see it being made, and I've had other customs, but to have one of this level, and then a lot of time you get like custom kit, and it doesn't work. The great thing about production kit is it's been tested and tested and tested and tested. But this one, it just, oh my God, I just feel like a superhero. And I think it's partly the board, and it's partly the feeling I get, just pushes me that. It's like the Dumbo and the Magic Feather. I fucking love that board, man.
Do you have it here? Is that what you
It's in my van. Just
okay.
Okay.
Nice.
You can't borrow it.
No. Well, for sure. That would be a big mistake that you would regret if I borrowed it. What one book would you recommend for somebody that's working in the sports and outdoor industry, or maybe wants to work in the sports or outdoor industry, to inspire them and maybe help them in their journey?
Oh man, I read a lot. Like, it's kind of a bit of a joke amongst my friends. Like, whenever I go on a trip, sports trip somewhere, I've got like a suitcase full of books, and I like them to be books, not Kindle, not audiobooks. There's just something about turning the pages on a book for me. And I do read a lot in around business, self-help, a lot of autobiographies. And I always tend to be a fan of the last one I read. I can't narrow it to one. In marketing, I would say the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. It's very old, very thin book. You could read it on the toilet. It's funny, and it will teach you things they don't teach you in a marketing degree or a master's degree. It's just common sense and gives you easy examples, and it's just so relatable. I've bought hundreds of copies over the years for clients, and I test them on it, in terms of their own business. So that's like, if you want to get an insight into marketing strategy in really understandable terms, the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing. I'm sorry, Dan. I'm going to have to give a few others.
I'll list them in the show notes for everyone.
In life, I've just finished Dave Grohl's book, lead singer of the Foo Fighters, and the drummer from Nirvana. Also, Slash's book was pretty good. So I like musicians, because these guys are generally pretty fucked up people, and have had very turbulent life, and as a result have learnt a lot through it. And and if they make it past 27 and don't drown in their own vomit, they tend to be pretty wise people. So I enjoyed reading that. And then as I said, just such a big Steve Bartlett fan, and he's done hundreds of podcasts. And as he says at the start of his own book, he doesn't like long books, and he's got those 33 rules, and I've read a lot of them, but some of those are just so profound, and he's taken them from some of his guests. I imagine you'll have a book coming out soon enough. It's a great way to cheat. And he's really just, consolidated what the best guests, I hope I get a chapter, or not. And he's consolidated what the best guests have sort of said. And there's just a couple in there that just transcend everything, business and life, and instantly implementable, which is a big thing for me as well. Aggregation of marginal gains is a theme for sure. Sorry, you asked for one, and I know I gave you about 6.
So if you can give future leaders in our industry, in the sports and outdoor industry, 3 bits of advice.
I think kind of reflecting what we've been talking about, the first one is take time to understand who you are, where your passion is. People I know who just flip all over the place. It's probably because they don't have that anchor. You and I will always do this, to the day we die, we'll work in some way, within it, and we're the lucky ones. So do the work, as the Americans say, and discover who you are, and then let things fall into place, rather than just chasing the result. I think that's the first one. The second one is about just wanting to be a part of an industry and just getting in there. It's do it for free. Fucking pay them to do it. Don't do it for the job title. Move country, whatever it takes, because it's no matter how young or old you are, it's the rest of your life. It's the biggest investment you got, and that's you. And you don't get a second shot at this life. Don't wait. It's so easy to talk about the risks, right? I've got family, I've got this, that. Everyone does that. But then I guess that brings me on to the third. I'm staying pithy for you here, is risk, and your relationship with risk. Don't do, I talked about the surfers, who their metric of success is never falling in, never getting embarrassed, and the rest of it. Embrace it, celebrate your failures. That surfer who's falling in the time and everyone's laughing at, and I always say, that's always me. People are always criticizing, always laughing, but some of those surfers, they go on to become the very best. The people who take no risks, they don't improve.
Brilliant. Well, I think we're about out of time. We could carry on for a lot longer, but thank you very much for taking the time. It's been really great talking to you, actually.
It's been a pleasure for me.
It's some really great topics, and I have to say, you've always been somewhat of an inspiration for me, because I remember, I think maybe it was one of the European Outdoor Summits, one of the first times I heard you speak, and I was like, okay, this is somebody to kind of watch, and what you do and the part you play, I think, in the industry is really inspiring. So yeah, thank you for today, and thank you for that, and good luck for the coming weeks, months, and years at Brandwave. I'm interested to hear about what's coming maybe next year.
Firstly, that's just such a kind thing to say, and I would say the same. When I first met you, you were right at the top of the industry, and I was right at the bottom. So, something to aspire to. Secondly, thank you for the opportunity, and I hope collectively that those listening can take something away from this. I'm sure not all. And as for those other bits, watch this space.
Great. Brilliant. Thanks, Dan. I hope you enjoyed the episode as much as I did. We love to read your feedback, so please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks again for your support. See you soon, and don't forget to subscribe.